now live, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Alice Gilsdale. I'm the Chair of West Central Area Committee. I'd like to welcome everyone, including the members of the public who've joined us for the committee taking place tonight on Thursday, the 16th of November, starting at 6:30 p.m, and those watching on the Council's YouTube channel. I have received apologies from Councillor Sweeney, but I don't think that there are any other apologies that we are expecting. So members of the committee are Councillor Bick, Councillor Holloway, Councillor Nethsinger, Councillor Payne, Councillor Porrer, Councillor Smith and Sweeney. And we have county councillors as well, Councillor Gay, Councillor Nethsinger and Councillor Ray. Although I can't see Councillor Gay at the moment. Oh, yeah, I can see him. Fantastic. And the officers at the table for the meeting are our meeting producer, Boris Herzog, and the committee manager, Claire Tunnicliffe. We've had apologies from Joel Carey, who's the head of environmental services and lead officer for the committee, but he has sent his updates via the report. If anyone has any problems hearing me throughout the meeting or hearing anyone, please type in the chat function. And as the chair, I've swapped the agenda items around for this evening's committee just for practical reasons. So we're going to take the public questions first, followed by the grants item and then the environmental report. So that's the order we'll be taking it this evening. Just on housekeeping, this committee cannot make decisions, but we're here to discuss local issues, and the meeting is broadcast via the council's website. Any public speakers are reminded that by speaking and appearing, you are giving consent to being recorded, and the recording will then be available via the council's YouTube channel. So as we go through the agenda, the officers will give a brief introduction to their report, and then anyone in attendance, so councillors and members of the public, will be able to speak. Please raise your hand or type in the chat function if you'd like to ask a question. And then we will check to see if any public questions have been submitted via email. So if we're ready to go, I'm going to move on to agenda item 2. Do any councillors have any declarations of interest which they'd like to identify at this point in time? No? Okay, fantastic, thank you. And agenda item 3. So the notes of the meeting of the 24th of November are attached to the agenda. If anyone has any concerns or updates, please could you raise them now?
Yes.
Councillor Smith?
Yes, I attended that meeting, but I'm not recorded as doing so.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Okay.
That's really, really bad.
Thanks for letting us know. Fantastic. And I can't see any other questions. So I'm just muting you again. Okay, so agenda item 4. I don't think we're going to go through all the individual actions, but I'm asking the committee to note the updated actions in the committee action sheet, unless anyone has anything they'd like to highlight. The things that are shown as completed will then be removed from the sheet after this meeting. Councillor Porrer?
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered if it was possible to request that all councillors get some feedback after the multi-agency meeting about the speeding on the commons. That's, I think, it's happening later this month, so obviously it hasn't happened yet, but just be grateful if it could be passed back to Joel. That we'd be grateful for an update, if that's okay. That's on page 11. Thanks.
Yeah. I actually received, he sent me through some notes today from a meeting, and I think we received the minutes from the previous one, so I don't know whether the one this month has already happened. It sounds like it's on the 22nd of March, but he sent through something today that looked really promising, so I'll definitely record that and ask him to send through the notes when they come through. Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so I'm good. Oh, no further questions. I'm going to move on to public questions from the open forum. So this is the final agenda point, but I'm moving it up in the agenda. So I believe we've got Peter Constable on behalf of Jesus Green Association. I can see you're in the meeting. Would you like to read the question out, or would you like me to read it out on your behalf?
I'm happy for you to read it, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the question is, Jesus Green Association proposal some years ago was to refurbish the pavilion. After a professional survey, it was found to be past renovation. The association agreed with the council that a new Rouse Ball building should be erected as a new entrance to the swimming pool and should contain a cafe/restaurant, new toilets and dressing rooms for the pool, and new up-to-date toilets for visitors, including the disabled. It would also contain meeting rooms and details of the history of Jesus Green. The pavilion has now deteriorated markedly and is dangerous. The toilets, while having a temporary refit, are hardly fit for purpose. Section 106 funds were proposed, and Trinity College had agreed a small donation in memory of Ruth Ball, a member of the college and a city councillor whose legacy included the pavilion. We think it's important for a capital funding proposal to be initiated by the council to ensure that these most important improvements to Jesus Green are implemented as soon as possible. Thank you for the question. I hope I pronounced that name correctly.
Yes, can I just add one sentence at the end?
Of course.
Are you prepared after such a long delay to push the project forward, preferably by a meeting between JGA and ward councillors?
Yes, well, I can see both Katie and Councillor Porrow and Councillor Bick nodding, and myself as ward councillor, I'm very happy to organise a meeting with the Jesus Green Association. I think that would be a very good first step in taking this forward. I have a response from the officers on this question, if that's helpful. So I'm just going to read that out as well. So as the question alludes, there is a relationship between the Lido and the pavilion, and improvements to the Lido have been focused on what's available via Section 106 swimming pool contributions, and they've included improvements to the pool tank and to improve accessibility and usability for users, for things like, and some of the things that they've done have profiled the pool tank to make it shallower and more accessible for children, and they've inserted thermal insulation and a couple of other things which I can send you all the details for. We've also funded through capital funding some improvements to the pool plant room, and as a result of that, these improvements impact on when and what we can do to the Ruse Ball Pavilion. So the plans to relocate the Ruse Ball Pavilion to the pool to create the cafe and space currently aren't affordable in the short term because of the financial environment that the council's in. However, it's still an ambition for the council to deliver these facilities as part of the leisure offer when the current leisure contract expires at the end of March, and that's March 2026. And work is now commencing on what the new leisure contract can deliver over the coming year. So officers could start to work with the group, the Friends of Jesus Green, on what the new facility would look like. So I think that's definitely something that we would all be happy to go away and organise. So that would include working on what the facility would look like, where it would be sited, and any designs and a position that can be taken to planning permission for buildings and things like that. However, any delivery of a facility wouldn't be until after 2026 as a result of the contract. So in the short term, sorry, I'm nearly at the end, the Streets and Open Spaces team have considered options for both the Ruse Pavilion and the toilet provision, and have made improvements to the toilets and sublet part of the pavilion to support the punters on the river. The toilets are in quite a good condition and are serviced every day. And we also make repairs and remove graffiti as it appears, and the building remains fit for purpose. And we accept that this is just a short-term solution, and we're not saying that we can't do this work or that we shouldn't do this work, but that it's going to have to span a few more years before we can get something sorted. I know that Councillor Porritt, your hand. Perfect. Would you like to add?
Yeah, it's certainly something I think the council have been looking at since before I was elected about 4 years ago, because I remember people talking about the Raspall Pavilion then with Peter and Jesus Green Association. So yeah, I would really want to be part of that. And I think particularly, as you know, we've got public toilet cuts. We're cutting the Midsummer Common ones, so they're only going to be open partially for some of the year, and we've got the Chester Road ones being closed. And you know, I am really concerned that the pressure on Jesus Green is going to be increased. And as I think Peter and fellow residents of that area know, unfortunately, when the toilets are overused, people tend to avail themselves of other people's gardens and pathways, which is really not acceptable, and obviously not great for our streets and open spaces teams to have to clear up. So yeah, I mean, I'd be very happy to take this forward, and it's a bit disappointing we aren't going to look at funding for 3 years though, because certainly I had understood that this is something we've been looking at for quite a while, irrespective of the Lido. But obviously I don't know if Peter wants to add anything, but yeah, the sooner we can get a meeting going, the better, really. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I would agree with that entirely. I'd question the fact that the officers seem to say that the building is fit for purpose. I suggest you go along and have a look at the roof. It is in bits, and I know it's leaking. And as the survey 5 or 6 or 7 years ago said, it is in too bad a state to repair. That's why they went forward to suggesting the removal of it. So, and I'd also question the toilets. I mean, the toilets are certainly not fit for disabled people. And quite frankly, they're Victorian, and they may be sort of spruced up from time to time, but that's not enough.
Thanks for that, Peter. Councillor Bick.
Yes, I agree with Peter that the statements being made about the adequacy of the public toilets in the Raspall Pavilion it's being overstated. These are woefully short of the capacity required for Jesus Green, and that was the case before we closed the Park Street Park public toilets, pointing to the Jesus Green ones as the alternative. And when we close for part of the year, part of the week, in future, the Midsummer Common public toilets, saying the same thing. And the proposed and now decision to close the Chesterton Road public toilets completely, for which the Jesus Green public toilets were regarded as the good alternative. We've taken all of the savings from closing other public toilets based on the Jesus Green ones being the answer. But actually, when you go and look at them, the high maintenance costs of something that is really grossly inadequate, the demands upon it. And like Peter, I remember us talking about this for, well, it must be more than 5 years. And Peter and ward councillors aren't in disagreement, but the council doesn't have no money for capital investment. There is a capital programme as long as your arm for schemes all around the city. It's a question in the end of political will. And I do think that based on this sort of conversation and Peter's question, that really needs to be revisited, because you can't on the one hand take all the savings from closing other public toilets, still not provide the investment in decent facilities on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Vick. No, I agree. I think that it's important that this has been raised, and I hope that we can get a meeting in with the officers and discuss a way forward for this. So,
I just mention one other point,
Mhm.
and that is that the funding proposals during this long discussion on the Rouse Ball have included the Heritage Lottery Fund. Now, as a package, the alterations that are being made to the pool, and then the alterations that we're proposing for the entrance to the pool and for things like the history of Jesus Green, those are ideal subjects for instance, the Heritage Lottery Fund. And I would ask you, through you, the officers, if they have explored that route for the funding.
Yeah, that's a good point. Councillor Gay, was that a hand?
Yeah, just to say that it might be worth approaching Trinity, because whatever it costs to refurbish it is going to be small change to them. I don't know how much this small donation that they've made is, but they have huge amounts of money, and they need to atone for some of the things that they've done over the last few years as well. So it might seriously be worth having a word with the Principal Bursar or Sally Davies and seeing if something could be done.
It is very small, proposed donation.
Okay, well, maybe we can push it an open door then and see whether they're willing to give us a bit more. But yeah, no, definitely, I think this is stuff that we can all discuss with the officers. So shall I take an action point away to put us all in touch with the officers? Peter, I'm assuming that we've got your contact details through the committee manager. Okay,
Yes.
fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us today, and thanks for the question.
Thank you for all your help. Bye. All
right, thanks. Have a good evening. Okay, so we've got another public question that I'm going to read out because the member of the public isn't in attendance this evening. So the question is, I live in Cambridge City Centre on City Road, quite close to the Grafton Centre. My question relates to engine idling by cars and vans in this area. At the end of City Road, where it meets the Grafton Street area, the rear of the Grafton Centre near the car park, behind Next and Starbucks, and in fact anywhere a car can pull up to offload shoppers heading to the Grafton, there seems to be a complete lack of understanding by car drivers of the polluting effect of their idling engines on the air quality where we live. Sometimes I speak to them and politely request that they turn off their engines, and nearly always am met by bafflement as to why this is necessary. My understanding is that an idling engine can emit twice as much pollution as a moving vehicle, and that there's been some discussion in Westminster about introducing on-the-spot fines for engine idling. At present, I believe drivers can be issued a fine if they fail to turn off their engine within 60 seconds of being asked to do so. Section 42 of the Road Traffic Act 1988 prohibits leaving your engine on when it is not needed. I believe we need to tackle engine idling as an important part of our efforts to reduce pollution in Cambridge. In light of this, would it be possible to have a number of anti-idling posters and signs put up in the area? Any other measures aimed at sorting out this problem would also be welcome. Are there any comments from members on this? So, Councillor Porra?
Well, I live in this area as well, and it's a particular problem because there's a sort of disabled drop-off space which is legitimately used, but it's also very convenient for people just to sort of pop in and leave their car. And I do the same with people. I go up and go, can you turn it off? And occasionally get told where to go. Other times they do, or they do look surprised. I did, as it happens, actually, I was talking to the traffic warden the other day a bit about this, and they are trying to enforce it, but obviously they're not there all the time. So I think I meant, because something similar came up last meeting, and I'm a big fan of some of those, you know, the posters the kids do. So I know a lot of our primary schools now, St Matthew's and I think St Albans, have got the big, you know, turn off your engine, you know, it's polluting, it's killing kids kind of thing. And so I wonder as well if the council would consider doing some kind of, you know, competition where we could have a a child's poster or something, because I think sometimes that's almost more effective than the ones that kind of go, Cambridge City Council tell you to do this. They're a bit more eye-catching. And I know in some areas we have heritage issues, but I think that part of City Road and the Grafton is probably a more modern end of the ward, shall we say, as I'm sure Councillor Bick and Councillor Gilderdale know. So I'd be interested to, if we could take that forward with officers to explore, because, you know, it's frustrating as well, because it also blocks the disabled parking space for people who legitimately need to use it. And it is a dead end. So, yeah, there's nowhere to go if someone's just sitting waiting there. So it's certainly a problem that, yeah, I would like to be treated more actively. But again, we can't just rely on traffic wardens because they can't be there, you know, 24 hours a day.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Yeah, I completely agree. I think I've actually just looking at Joel Carey's notes that are in the papers, because I think they actually kind of answer this question as well, in terms of our enforcement powers, and suggest that the council doesn't really have the we don't have the resource to actively police this, but I think that traffic wardens are definitely a good start for people who are around and are looking at parked cars anyway. And I know that we discussed it last committee about putting some signage up. So I think that that's a good way to focus on reducing idling, especially in areas like you mentioned, such as schools or very residential areas. So I can go back to Joel with that suggestion from the committee and see if there's something that we can be, that can be done, potentially in certain hotspots. But yeah, as I said, he sent us apologies for this evening, so he hasn't been around to answer that question. But just for the minutes and for the person who asked this question, in the committee papers, in the committee action sheet on page, let me just find it, I think it's page 1, at the bottom of page 1, 2, point 2, the minute reference, that whole section talks about engine idling, and it has a response in red to a previous question that was quite similar to this one. So we can send that to the person who wrote the question, if that's possible, so that there is a full written response there. Okay, does anyone else have anything on this question or topic? And is there anything via the email at all, Claire?
Not at this moment, Chair.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. All right, well, let's move on to agenda item 6, which is the area committee grants, on page 39 of the agenda pack. I'd like to welcome Julie Cornwall, the Community Funding and Voluntary Sector Manager, who is going to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilderdale. This report provides a summary of the Area Committee funding applications which have been received and assessed for consideration for the West Central Area Committee funding. We received funding requests of £4,261 against an available budget of £6,993, and it's recommended that £3,811 of awards are made, and these are listed in Appendix 1. To set this within the context of the other area committee grants, we received funding requests of over £76,254 for the North area for an available budget of £23,751. For the East area, we received applications totalling £46,120 for an available budget of £21,959. For the South area, we received applications totalling £17,639 against an available budget of £17,297. Due to the unprecedented demand, many of the applications to those areas were unsuccessful or received greatly reduced awards. It's been a challenging process this year, and our grants criteria has been rigorously applied to ensure council funds have been awarded to those groups who submitted a strong application, demonstrated a good fit for our funding priorities, and could demonstrate a high level of need for the funding for their organisation and for the beneficiaries. So following the publication of this report, all West Central area applicant groups were emailed and sent to the link to the agenda and this report as is usual practice. Councillors were also invited to contact the grants team prior to this meeting if they wish to discuss individual funding decisions. The rationale for specific funding applications will not be discussed this evening, recognising this is a public forum and it's not the most appropriate place to discuss and share sensitive or confidential information regarding a group, for instance around governance arrangements or financial information which may not yet be in the public domain, or even on the quality of a group's application. However, you will see in Appendix 1 that we have listed a summary reasons where it's relevant to the application. Where a nil or reduced award has been made, this is due to one or more of the following reasons. The grant scheme outcomes and or priorities were not adequately met. There's poor or insufficient identification of need, or poor or insufficient understanding of the beneficiaries was not well demonstrated. There were concerns around the quality or the viability of the project. The activity was not targeted at beneficiaries living in a specific area of the city. The proposals were the remit of another service, fund or organisation. The organisation was ineligible. There was the inclusion of inappropriate costs, for example, in equipment-only requests, or the organisation did not demonstrate the beneficiaries could not fund the activity themselves. Also, the financial need of the organisation may not have been demonstrated, or there was an over-reliance on community grants funding. Councillors are invited to comment on the recommendations in Appendix 1. This in turn will inform the final decision as to where the West Area Committee funding will be allocated. And then I will approve the final awards and assure the decision notice is submitted accordingly. I'm happy to take any questions the committee may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Julie. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the proposed? Councillor Bick?
Yes, I mean, you've made it rather difficult to ask questions with because you told us we can scrutinise it, but you won't be able to respond. But I'm obviously a little puzzled by the position you're envisaging taking on the application from Christ Pieces Residents Association. I mean, I can't judge the merits of what they sent you, but I can say that they have run these events over a long period of time, and they have been given grants for them, and they do seem to have been very successful in drawing the community together around common themes that the community kind of is interested in. And so I'm a little perplexed by what feels a bit like a sudden change of heart about what I imagine would have been a similar application, but I don't know because I didn't see it.
Okay, well, I'll do my best to answer as much as I can. It's just what I don't want to do is there to be any suggestion that we don't appreciate or value the work of any community group. And when they're not here and haven't, if you like, given me permission to start talking about some details, I don't want to put them in a position where they might be embarrassed by what I disclose and so on. So that's really the motivation behind it. And in terms of previous funding decisions, I know that this group has previously had funding for similar activity every year. I'm relatively new to the council, and what I can say is that in all good conscience, it is our responsibility as a team to make sure we apply the funding criteria that we've got and that the council's agreed fairly and consistently. So when we have applications that far exceed the overall value of the award, I have to be able to look any group in the eye and say, we only funded the applications that really strongly meet the criteria and where there's a clear evidence of need for our council funding. So that's kind of really one of the main reasons, and we've tried to summarise that by saying that we felt that in this case the grant scheme and outcomes or priorities weren't adequately met. So by that we mean we didn't feel the application really demonstrated any kind of impact around social and or economic deprivation, and we didn't feel that there was any acknowledgement that or any evidence that the beneficiaries couldn't fund the activity themselves, and we weren't clear how it was going to make any kind of social or economic impact on them. This is, you know, a one-off event. It happens once a year. It's one talk. So bearing in mind, as I say, the broader unprecedented demand we've had for this funding, you know, there may be funding available for this area, but I then can't, in all good conscience, go back to a group in the north and say, well, we funded this group that didn't really meet the criteria, but we couldn't fund you because we hadn't got the funds. You know, I feel that it's our responsibility as a local authority to, particularly in the cost of living crisis, to make sure the funds are allocated where they're really badly, you know, desperately needed. That's not to say we don't think it's a really nice activity. It's more about what's the best fit for council money. And I'd be really happy to try and support this group find alternative funding. And I'm really pleased to see they've applied for a coronation grant. So I'm really hopeful that they will get an award of some kind from us as a local authority.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Bick, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm muted. Could I just follow up on that? So have the criteria changed since
No.
they applied last time?
No. I think
Okay.
what
So obviously that's going to be quite difficult for them to understand, isn't it?
I really do appreciate that. And I think perhaps in the past, when we haven't had such an overwhelming demand and when we haven't had a cost of living crisis as we're in now, that may be why there's perhaps been much more flexibility around whether the applications, and it's not just this one, and I don't want to make it personal about this one, but why some applications may perhaps have been funded, whereas now when you actually look at them across the piece and you consider the pressure and demand, and you may know that in terms of the main area committee funding, where we had £1,023,000, we actually had over £1,888,000 worth of requests. You know, the demand is just unheard of. So I think really that's probably, you know, the best explanation I can give around, well, why not this year, but we got this previous years.
But I mean, just the other part of what you said was that the other reason why I think it might be difficult for them to understand is that actually the area committee's money is, as proposed, would be underspent by some considerable way, and in fact the actual proposed grants are, well, a bit over half of what we have available, so that also make it a bit difficult for them to understand.
Yes, it will, but we have to consider applications that meet the criteria. So what we would be doing is encouraging any community group now that thinks they can support residents who have a social or economic need. We'd be saying, come forward, you know, bring us an application that actually meets the criteria. We can't just spend the money because we've got it. You know, we've got to be responsible about how we spend it.
Thank you for that. Councillor Holloway, you've got your hand up.
Thank you very much for this, Julie. It's a really interesting report, actually. And yeah, I think the work on this is great. I first of all have a quick question, and then after that I've got a bit more I'd like to say. But first question is, will this money that is underspent within our committee be reallocated to other areas and so given to other community groups in other areas of the city?
It all goes into a pot. There's a slight underspend in the south as well. So it all goes into a pot and it will be assessed against the criteria. Every application is looked at purely on our criteria, and that is very much about need. Does the group evidence the need? Are the beneficiaries people that need financial help? What are the outcomes? What's the impact here? What are they going to be able to measure? Do we have any concerns about previous awards? Have they delivered all the things in previous grant agreements? All of that is taken in the round, but the greatest priority is certainly that it must make a visible impact on economic and social deprivation.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much, Julie. I did think that was the case. So I think in that case, it's again really interesting to look at this, because we see that far fewer groups have come forward within our area than within the other areas, which seems to confirm the idea that actually more money probably should be going to some of those other areas, just because this is about reducing social and economic inequality within Cambridge, and we represent wards which, broadly speaking, are wealthier and better off. There are, of course, people within our wards that are struggling as well, but overall, we're lucky to be representing wards that have got lots of people who are pretty well off and doing pretty well. So I think actually, given we've got loads of people who are struggling at the moment, we know that it's a really tough time for a lot of people in Cambridge, and we know that more of those people are in other areas. I do think that it makes sense that we really strictly prioritise those in the most need, regardless of where they are, really. So the final point I'd like to make there is I just wonder actually whether having these area committee community grants is a good idea, and whether actually this money should just be put into the same pot as the overall community grants, just as probably that would be a way of helping more people who are already applying for the community grants and not getting the. And then if you're looking at tackling inequality across the whole of Cambridge, probably makes sense actually to do it across the whole city.
If I may come back on that, that's music to my ears. It's exactly what we're discussing as a team. Is this an appropriate way forward? What we'd really like to do is carry out some kind of review of how effective area committee grants are, and we'll start that process every year. The grants team have a day where we review what worked well, what didn't, what do we need to change, and we'll do that in May. And we'd like to come back to councillors with our thoughts on that. And I've actually arranged, and I'm shamelessly plugging this now, an all councillor briefing in September, where I'd really like to hear your thoughts about, what would be the most effective way to run things moving forwards. For example, we're thinking potentially, we piloted, you might know, a small grants application process last year, and that was really effective. And we had applications from groups that we've never had application from before. And we're thinking perhaps if that has a ceiling of £2,000 at the moment, but we're thinking, is there a way that we could try and reflect some of the best things about area committees in that? For example, maybe increase it to £5,000, but really focus on the need. Is there a way that we can kind of get the best of both? So that's really something that we want to look at, and we're really keen to. So watch this space.
Thank you. No, I think all the comments have been really, really helpful and useful to get a picture of not just, this round of committee grants, but that actually, while this may throw up some issues or it's actually indicative of broader problems that we're probably dealing with in terms of the committee grants process, and how we can manage it through area committees that are no longer decision making and things like that. So I think that's really, really helpful, and I'm sure we'll try and make the all member briefing. So next I've got Councillor Smith.
Yes, I just wanted to ask one question and make a few points. The first thing is, in relation to the Oblique Arts project, where is the Darwin Gallery?
Oh, now you've put me on the spot. I may have to come back.
Apologies for that.
No, I should know this, but
I've
seen so many. I don't know how many, probably 200 applications. But can I can probably check that whilst you're dealing with your next item, and I could put something in the chat if that would be helpful.
Too much about it. I also noticed that the funding for the Friends of Histon Road Cemetery is allocated to West Central, whereas actually Histon Road Cemetery is not in West Central, it's in North. And I see there are beneficiaries that live in Castle, but it's a bit of a fudge on that one. just for future reference, should we still be following this process? And I think I want to strongly endorse the comments that have been made, that the administrative overheads of atomising these grant funds and bringing them to the area committees, and this applies to environment ones as well, is, I don't think, a very efficient and effective use of our resources. It could well be we're looking at administrative costs and overheads of in excess of the actual grants that we are allocating. And I cannot think for a moment that that is a reasonable way to go about doing our business. Now, I am a very strong advocate of grant making for community groups and organisations in the city. And I think one of the things that we need to be looking at is investing more in them. And I was a strong advocate for whole inflation proofing of this year's community grant scheme. And I think that if you're thinking about future investment, which I think we must, then we should be looking to invest in fundraising resources. I have to confess, I spent a career as a grantologist doing this game of bidding for government funding, and it can be a lucrative business, but and it's still a bit wasteful resources out of this bidding business. But if you give people support, the competencies and capacities to make good bids, there's a lot of other money out there that can be brought into the city that we otherwise wouldn't ever see. And I think that is something that needs to be done. And I was in this game 20 years ago, and I realised we couldn't really progress it. This is at county. We couldn't really progress it in the way in which the demand warranted. And that's why I seeded the Cambridgeshire Community Foundation, which has now obviously been very, very successful. Nothing to do with me, but it's been very successful in bringing resources from the community for the benefit of the community and from government as well. And I think that's what we need to be thinking about. Big picture, strategic level stuff. Yeah. Stop troubling us at this level with, wasting your evening coming along here to talk to us about penny packet amounts of money. Come on, let's get real. Let's start getting the resources going and put them into the hands of people who can create real value with the cash that we can bring to them. Thank you.
Again, really, really helpful comments. Sort of gives me confidence in the direction of travel that we need to go in. So thank you for that. Something I'd really like to do is not just have one funding window as well. So whether we could kind of somehow work this. I would just say I completely agree with you about not just being a grant giver, but more of an enabler. For example, this week's been Support CAMS Funding Week. So this morning I was delivering a webinar to community organisations about funding, and other organisations were doing the same, and we need to do more of that. And it is something that we make a grant award to CCVS to deliver as well. So take that completely on board. And one of my members of the team has been studiously checking where the Darwin Gallery is and tells me it's at St Augustine's, if that means anything to you.
Lovely, thank you. I think St Augustine's is a church, no?
Let me see if she comes back and messages me. I'll tell you.
I think it is. Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you for your comments, and it's really great to hear that we see the grant giving, but actually, and I think what's been echoed a lot this evening is that we want to facilitate all community groups who need money to get the money, whether that's from us or whether that's from other sources. And we have lots of knowledge and experience in grant making and applying for grants and looking over grant applications. So whether we can support them or we can write letters of support in other grants that they're making, we can definitely facilitate that and try and work towards that. Councillor Porrer, thanks for waiting.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I suppose whilst I agree with the idea of sharing things across the city. I do like the fact there are these local forums where people can at least make their case, you know. And I think the reason I'm a little uncomfortable about the Christ Pieces one is I didn't realise we couldn't scrutinise it in this meeting. And I know that they had contacted the chair and the ward councillors last week, and I kind of assumed we'd have a discussion at this meeting about it. And I feel a little bit uncomfortable purely because from what I understand, you know, I'm sure like other ward councils, I've been to loads of residents associations and talks like this one. If they've put the same application in for, well, certainly several years, if not decades, and we've always agreed it and the criteria haven't changed, I wonder if we should think about why we didn't make that clear. Because to a certain extent, whilst I take Councillor Holloway's point, there are certain wards like all of ours which tend to have a different demographic. There are still issues around loneliness and things like that can, and I'm just a little worried that in effect it's quite hard to justify rejecting it with the same criteria that we accepted it last year. And so I suppose I'm a bit disappointed. I mean, I apologise if I missed this, but I didn't realise that we couldn't debate it here. Otherwise, obviously, I'd have got in touch with Julia early in the week and sort of said maybe the representatives wanted to come along. It just seems a bit odd to go 1 year we will and 1 year we won't, but nothing's changed. And it may be that previously there were applications people have remembered historically. So I don't know. As you say, we can't comment on it. So I'm a bit stymied. The other question I had was the Friends of Midsummer Common bid, which obviously was approved. Is there any reason why it's not the full amount? Is it because some of the other bits are from other committees? So we're funding it from North and East. That's bid WC4. So obviously I'm just assuming, if, as you said, if we have the money and they meet the criteria, I just wasn't sure why it wasn't the full amount. Thanks.
Okay, I'll answer the last one first because my memory. We've actually increased the award from 900 to 1,000 this year. Some of this funding or the things they need to do are actually funded from Alistair Wilson's pot as well. So that's really, why it's not the full amount. Yeah, we really do like this activity, and we really like they're starting to gather some information about volunteering. They've got I don't know whether it's a new website or some kind of new app, but we really are interested to get some more monitoring information, and who knows what they'll apply for next year. But hopefully it'll be bring through a bit more around the volunteering, which is the aspect we particularly liked. And in response to the Christ Pieces Residents Association, the grant agreement does say that it's for 1 year only, and they're advised within that specifically not to assume that the award 1 year means that you'll get an award another. I know the reality of that, though. You might say, well, it says that, but they've been getting it. But that is what they're advised. I'm very happy to, well, I will email you individually anyway and just give you a breakdown of the reasons in a bit more detail. But we have to take each application on its merits at the time we receive it. They may have applied previously. I don't know about the level of information that was submitted in those previous applications. I can only tell you about the level of information that we received this year. It was scant, really scant. And then compare that, as I say, to so many community groups that really were able to demonstrate a need in other parts of the city, but we still couldn't fund. It's just that feeling of trying to do the right thing by the council, really. So I do understand why they'll be disappointed, and I just really hope we can point them in the direction of a different pot of funding that feels more appropriate.
Thank you. Yeah, as I say, that was just my slight frustration. Is I thought we'd be discussing it tonight, so I don't know what they wrote, so I can't say if it was less or more than last year. It just seems a bit strange that. Yeah, I think maybe next time we need to be really clear to councillors that if we need more information, we need to go before the meeting, because I had understood it was kind of being looked at this week and we'd have more information tonight. So maybe in future, if we could make sure that we do know exactly what we can debate, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, yeah.
Definitely, thank you. And I know that if the Christ Pieces Residents Association want to speak to Julie or want responses, particularly on any of this, I'm sure. I know that Julie has offered that and has been in contact with them already. So whether that's discussing how to put an application together the next year that fits the criteria that the council is looking for example, especially now with more organisations competing for the same pot. Okay, thank you. It doesn't look like there's any more questions. Do we have anything online at all, Claire?
We don't, Chair, no.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you, Julie. I just want to say thank you on behalf of all the committee. We really, really appreciate your time. And I know that this has been a long process for you on top of all the other grant processes that you do. So we really appreciate that. And thanks for coming along this evening.
Thank you for having me.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye. All right, so we're moving on to the final agenda item now, which is the environmental report. So Wendy Johnson is here to introduce the report. Thank you, Wendy. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
So I'll just give a few highlights from the report, and then I'm more than happy to take any questions or comments around any of the service areas covered by this report. So I just wanted to take the time to highlight some of the work that the community engagement team have done over the past 6 months, because we've had some really positive work in the West area. Within the Castle ward, we've had quite a lot of work at the Ascension Burial Ground. We have a regular group of people that get involved with clearing the graves, renovating the benches, and they've also done some biodiversity works in terms of creating some bug hotels as well. We've also at Histon Road Recreation Ground, we've had several groups of volunteers do litter picking for us, particularly around the wooded areas where it doesn't always get litter picked by our operatives. Within the Market ward, we have had some partnership working with St Clement's Church, who approached us to work with Community Payback. They've spent 4 weeks renovating all of the railings at the church. So they look much more improved, and we've also done some work there in the gardens in the past as well. So we're hoping that positive relationship can keep going. At Midsummer Common, we've also had volunteers who undertook some litter picking for us, and we had a corporate group who also did some litter picking on the commons as well. And then at Jesus Green during the summer, we spent most weeks with our volunteers renovating a lot of the benches, where they stained them all and tidied them all up, and I think they looked much better throughout the summer period, and I think we managed to complete the majority of them on Jesus Green over the summer. And then within Newnham, we did quite a bit of work at some of the green spaces, doing what we call tree maintenance sessions or green sessions, where our volunteers will come along, they'll remove and cut back all of the saplings, remulch the trees, water them in the sort of the milder weather, to sort of help encourage their growth, which is in line with the advice from our tree team. And we've also had some Sunday litter pick groups that we organise, where volunteers can come along on a Sunday. We'll give them a time and a location, and they can meet up with fellow volunteers to get involved in litter picking, and those groups are continuing to grow, which is really positive to see. That's some of the highlighted work of the community engagement team across the ward, which I'm sure you'll agree is really positive to see. In terms of the environmental crime that we've got within the wards, which is on page 32, we have had an increase of fly tipping in both Castle and Market, but a reduction of fly tipping in Newnham. It's been quite a significant increase in Castle and Market, where both of them have nearly doubled. So we're not quite sure what that might be due to. We're seeing different patterns of fly tipping across the city, not any particular reason for it. What we have done now in September is we re-profiled the enforcement team. So instead of having just 2 officers in the city, we now have 3 teams of 2. So we have two of the teams cover the city centre, 1 team cover the Grafton side of the city centre, and 1 team cover the other side of the city centre, as well as doing some of the outlying wards, because we recognise that during peak times the majority of the environmental crime is happening in the city centre and just in the outside sort of the outlying roads and areas. So there should be more focus coming through, and I think maybe that might be why there's an increase in fly tipping, possibly where the teams are identifying more problems that may have just not been reported before. That's a really brief summary, Chair. I am more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Wendy. That was a really interesting report that you've brought. I just have a quick question. Where it says illegal camping, what does that mean exactly?
So when we're talking about illegal camping, we're talking about individuals or groups that have erected tents and are actually sleeping or staying in the tents. It doesn't include people that are rough sleeping in sort of sleeping bags or anything like that, and doesn't include where parents may put like pop-up structures in the summer for like children and stuff. So it's people kind of literally have put a tent up on the green space and are sleeping or camping in it.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. No, I just wanted to clarify that. I'm surprised to see 5 people have been camping in markets. Prime hotspot for wild camping, apparently. Does anyone else have any other questions? Councillor Porritt.
Thank you. I did want to thank Wendy and her team and all of the Streets and Open Spaces teams, because we had one particularly unpleasant graffiti issue. Really, I'm not going to repeat what it said, it's too rude. And within an hour of me reporting, it was scrubbed off the wall, which was really gratefully received by residents who'd reporting it. And also thank you for the actions you've taken in Market Ward. We had particular problems around Cobble Yard with the post office area, where there's been some antisocial behaviour and obviously some rough sleeping as well. So I know your officers have worked with the homeless support team and the police and our ASB team as well. And generally around the Grafton Centre as well, we're seeing an increase, unfortunately, in some of the littering, human waste and things. So again, those have been reported and cleared, so thank you. But obviously, I suppose it's just a matter of, as you're continuing to do, to prioritise some of those areas. I'm sure Councillor Bick and Councillor Gilderdale know as well that are well used and unfortunately sometimes can get quite littered and messy. So we're grateful for the work of your officers in doing that. So thank you. But I'd like to just obviously keep that on the agenda, particularly around Fitzroy Street areas and things where we've had some issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Porritt. Wendy, would you like to respond, or should I take a couple more points and questions?
I'm happy to take all the questions at the end.
Fantastic. Okay, Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about street cleaning, because it's something that's come up quite a few times with residents. Not so much in the last month or two, but it was more before Christmas. I think we had a period where it was really wet, and then there was just loads of mulch that was building up on some of the side streets. So I just wondered if I could get some clarification on, firstly, how often side streets tend to get cleared. I mean, I know it will depend on the street, but if you can give an indication of that. And then also on how you go about and how often you sort of clear cars from a road just temporarily to clear a street, because I know that sometimes that can be something that actually prevents streets from getting cleaned. Thanks.
Thanks. And then Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I just wanted to extend thanks to you, Wendy, and the teams for all the work that they do, and in particular the work at the Ascensional Burial Ground. I was visiting there the other day, and it looked absolutely superb, and that's very much appreciated. It's a wonderful place, and thank you for all the help.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I definitely think that in times where things are looking messy, people raise things with you. But I feel like when everything is going well and when the city is looking beautiful, people probably don't come to you and say thank you. So yeah, I'm glad that we're all sending our thanks to the teams, because clearly they've been really, really hard at work, and it's really appreciated. Councillor Bick.
Yeah, positive from me too. I think it's particularly good that that you're achieving so much through engaging volunteers in various places, and I think that's really amplifying the impact of your team. I had one question about bins. I'm talking about bins of the ordinary domestic kind, the wheelie bins, being left out on pavement as a continuous obstacle to people getting past without having to step out into the roadway seems to be a problem in quite a few places. I mean, in some cases, that's periodic and spasmodic because people might be away to take their bins in, and I think everyone can kind of live and understand that. But there are some places, and I wanted to quote James Street to you, where the flats above the funeral director seem to their bins seem to be out on the street, also out on the pavement. You know, I can't say continuously because I'm not there all the time, but they seem to be there whenever I go, and that's not necessarily bin day. And I just wonder, in cases where it's really continuous and really is obstructing a narrow pavement, what is the maximum we can do to sort of challenge that and have them put somewhere, or have a landlord provide somewhere for them to be put?
I don't think we have any further questions. So Wendy, if you'd like to come back on those.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for all the thanks. I will pass those on to the team leaders to pass on to the operatives at all of their team briefings. And we'll certainly keep an eye on the hotspot areas that have been raised. I will notify the relevant enforcement officers that cover those areas to make sure that they are particularly covering those. I think with the sort of the Fitzroy area, now that we have sort of two teams of officers, we have one team that are able to kind of focus on litter within the sort of, I don't know how you describe it, kind of like one side of the city, and the other side are kind of able to focus on the Grafton side. And we do know that Fitzroy and Burleigh Street are extreme hotspots for littering, which unfortunately is predominantly cigarette ends. So we do know that the numbers of fixed penalties for those areas are going up because unfortunately people continue to litter, but we are out and about a lot more to deal with those now. So I'll certainly pass those areas on. In terms of street cleansing and street sweeping, it is very much dependent on where we're talking about. Obviously, the problem we have in Cambridge, as you highlighted, is parked cars causing an obstruction. On the main roads, they are swept quite regularly. I'm not able to quote the exact schedule. I can go and speak to the team leaders and come back to you and find out what the sort of the schedule is, if that's okay, on sort of confirming the frequency. But we do have a standard that we have to try and work towards, which is set by national government in terms of our street cleanliness grading, and the mulch that you see at the side of the road is the detritus from a variety of different sources, and we have to aim for a minimum of a B grade, which is where there's very minimal mulch or detritus at the side of the roads. So at times some of the roads where there are parked cars will be sort of what we call a grade D, and that's the worst kind, and those will be areas that we'll sort of have to get out and cleanse and bring them up to an acceptable standard. In terms of the parked cars, it's extremely difficult for us to deal with that because although we can apply polite notices to cars and ask people not to park there, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to comply with what we ask them to do. Where roads are closed, sometimes by the highways teams, we will try and get in there, for example, if there's a road closure. So in recent years, they've had areas closed off down Mill Road when they were doing repair works down there. We would sort of street cleanse and sweep those where we could. But it is extremely difficult to try and get in to deal with that. I know they're planning to do something at Newnham Croft to get one of the drains cleared down there. So we'll sweep and clear that whole area, like when that's closed off by the highways team. We try and work with them where possible because it minimises impact to residents as well. So hopefully that will answer that sort of question, but I'll come back with a bit more information if I can about the cleansing schedules. And I will pass on the thanks about the Ascension Burial Ground to the community engagement officer that deals with that, because he's taken a very proactive role. In terms of domestic bins, we are working through a bins on street campaign across the city. As you can imagine, there are a lot of bins left out on the streets, particularly around the high density housing areas. We've started in January working our way down Mill Road, and we've got 2 teams currently working down there. What our process is restricted because the power to deal with bins was actually decriminalised by central government about a decade ago. where they took it away from being a criminal offence where it was nice and easy to deal with. It's a lot more cumbersome and administrative heavy now. What we will do in initial instance though is apply notices to people, the big bright yellow and black stickers indicating they need to move their bins off the streets. If they fail to comply and we think bins are abandoned, we'll then sticker them in line with the shared waste service and remove abandoned bins, because a lot of the problems we find are bins are left out and are actually abandoned bins, or bins that are completely being misused. We often find green bins in areas where people don't have gardens or don't generate green bin waste, so they shouldn't be there in the first instance. Sometimes people steal bins and move bins around for whatever reason, so we'll try and tackle that as one of the issues. But if people continue to leave bins out and they have suitable locations in which to store them, then we can put them on a it's like a civil notice requiring them to take reasonable steps to deal with the bins. If they don't comply with that, we can imply a civil penalty. But again, because it's a civil charge, it's very difficult to deal with. It's not as simple as our fixed penalties like we have for littering. So we can do that sort of in the worst case scenario. We try and work with people because it's easier to do it that way rather than try and just serving notices on people. In terms of landlords, they obviously do have a responsibility to manage their tenants as well. So if there's an issue with that, we will try and work with everyone when we can. But the most that we can do is issue a notice and then follow that through with a civil penalty in the worst cases where there are storage locations. Where they don't have storage locations, we will work with a shared waste service to identify whether they should have bins or whether they should be on sacks or smaller bins. So we do work very closely with the communications and strategy team within shared waste to try and tackle it jointly. So hopefully that answers all the questions.
Thank you so much. I had no idea about the way in which your team works with the highways team to get into those corners when the streets are closed. It's really sounds really efficient and yeah, very interesting. Unless anyone has any further questions, it doesn't look like anyone's got their hands up. Can I check, Claire, if there's anything been sent through?
There hasn't, Chair, no.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much, Wendy, for your report and for answering our questions. That was really helpful. Great, so we can now move on to agenda item 7, which is open forum. Have there been any questions sent by email to Matt?
There's none come through, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Okay, great. So we have come to the end of tonight's area committee. The next West Central Area Committee is the 15th of June. So unless anyone has any final questions, then we can end the meeting. No? Okay, well, we can terminate the live stream link now then.